Essays on Untouchables and Untouchability Religious by Babasaheb Ambedkar. Chapter 4, Part 3. What then does the educated Indian of today, more particularly the Brahmin, think of Christ? It is perhaps foolish to try to generalize. Yet there are certain broad features in the picture which may be safely described. There is a widespread acceptance of the main principles of Christ's teachings, particularly of his ethical teachings. It would be generally conceded that the Sermon on the Mount, while not necessarily containing anything which might not be paralleled from other sources, is unsurpassable as a directory for human conduct. Side by side with this widespread acceptance of Christ's teachings goes a very general reverence from his life and character. On the other hand, the claim that Christ was and is in a unique sense divine and is not with the majority of the Hindus, even of those deeply attracted by his life, would be prepared to accept. They would set him side by side with their own great prophet, the Buddha. But the Christian claim that he only is God incarnate and that salvation is to be won through faith in him and him alone, they reject as exclusive and narrow. Thus, the Christian claim to possess the one way of salvation arouses in India an almost instinctive repugnance. The characteristic religious attitude of the educated Hindu today is still, whilst he greatly reverences Christ and accepts the main principles of his teaching, he is quite content to remain a Hindu. I have no doubt that this correctly sums up the position. If this is so, then the money and the energy spent by the Christian missions on education and medical relief is misapplied and does not help the Indian Christians. The Indian Christians need two things. The first thing they want is the safeguarding of their civil liberties. The second thing they want is ways and means for their economic upliftment. I cannot stop to discuss these needs in all their details. All I wish to point out is that there is a great desideratum in the social work the Christian missions are doing in India. While what has been accomplished by Christian missionaries in the field of education and medical aid is very notable and praiseworthy, there still remains one question to be answered. What has Christianity achieved in the way of changing the mentality of the convert? Has the untouchable convert risen to the status of a touchable? Have the touchable and untouchable converts discarded caste? Have they ceased to worship their old pagan gods and to adhere to their old pagan superstitions? These are far reaching questions. They must be answered, and Christianity in India must stand or fall by the answers it can give to these two questions. The following extracts, taken from the memorandum submitted by the Christian depressed classes of South India to the Simon Commission, throw a flood of light on the position of the untouchables who have gone into the Christian fold so far as the question of caste is concerned. We are by religion Christians, both Roman Catholics and Protestants. Of the total population of Indian Christians of the presidency, the converts from the depressed classes form about 60%. When the Christian religion was preached in our lands, we, the Palas, Parayas, Malas, Madigas, etc., embraced Christianity. But others of our stock and origin were not converted, and they are known to be the Hindu depressed classes, being all Hindus or adherents to the Hindus in religion. In spite, however, of our Christian religion, which teaches us fundamental truths, the equality of man and man before God, the necessity of charity and love for neighbors and mutual sympathy and forbearance, we, the large number of depressed classes converts, remain in the same social condition as the Hindu depressed classes. Through the operation of several factors, the more important of them being the strong caste retaining Hindu mentality of the converts to Christianity and the indifference, powerlessness, and apathy of the missionaries, we remain today what we were before we became Christians. That is, untouchables. Degraded by the laws of social position obtaining in their land, rejected by caste Christians, despised by caste Hindus, and excluded by our own Hindu depressed class brethren. The small portion of the Christians of South India whose representatives are found in the Legislative Council, say in Madras, are caste Christians, a term which sounds a contradiction, but which unfortunately is the correct and accepted description of high caste converts from Hinduism who retain all the rigor and exclusiveness of caste. particularly in the Mofussil parts and the villages. They who ought to be our fellow Christian follow all the orthodox severity and unreason of caste exclusion. They damn us as panchamas or pariahs and ignore our Christian claims, and in the fullness of their affluence, power, prestige, and position, exclude us poorer Christians from society. Frequent outbursts of anti-Panchama activity are the scandal of the South Indian Christian life, and the least attempt on our part to better our lot, forward our progress, and assert our elementary rights. Call down the wrath and fury of every man, official and non-official, Christian or Hindu, who claims a foolish superiority of birth, denying the very foundations of Christianity, contrary to all love and charity and brotherhood. Our fellow Christians treat us, even in the churches, as untouchables and unapproachables, and relegate us to separate accommodation removed from their precincts and barricade their portions by means of iron rails and walls and fencings. There are several such churches. In the matter of reception of sacraments, the most ridiculous segregation is practiced to avoid pollution. Our claims to educate our children and train them for life are ruthlessly denied, and through sheer prejudice, our children are denied access to schools, convents, hostels, boarding houses, or, if admitted, are assigned an ignominious separate accommodation. Tracing his descent from high caste Hindu progenitors, the caste Christian looks for social status and position and finds favor in the eyes of his fellow caste men, the Hindus. He treats the depressed caste Christians in the same way as the Hindu depressed classes are treated by the Hindu caste people. What is stated here in general terms may be made concrete by reference to the two following incidents. Incidents were not mentioned. This is a terrible indictment. It is a relief to note that it does not apply to all parts of India, nor does it apply to all denominations of Christians. The picture is more true of the Catholics than of the Protestants. It is more true of southern India than it is of northern or even central India. But the fact remains that Christianity has not succeeded in dissolving the feeling of caste from among the converts to Christianity. The distinction between touchables and untouchables may be confined to a corner. The church school may be open to all. Still, there is no gainsaying the fact that caste governs the life of the Christians as much as it does the life of the Hindus. There are Brahmin Christians and non-Brahmin Christians. Among non-Brahmin Christians, there are Maratha Christians, Mahar Christians, Mang Christians, and Bhangi Christians. Similarly, in the south, there are Pariah Christians, Mala Christians, and Madhika Christians. They would not intermarry, they would not interdine. They are as much caste ridden as the Hindus are. There is another thing which shows that Christianity has not been effective in wiping out paganism out of the converts. Almost all the converts retain the Hindu forms of worship and believe in Hindu superstition. A convert to Christianity will be found to worship his family gods and also the Hindu gods such as Rama, Krishna, Shankar, Vishnu, etc. A convert to Christianity will be found to go on a pilgrimage to places which are sacred to the Hindus. He will go to Pandharpur and make offerings to Vithoba. He will go to Jerusalem and sacrifice a goat to the bloodthirsty god Khandoba. On the Ganesh Chaturthi, he will refuse to see the moon. On a day of eclipse, he will go to the sea and bathe. Superstitions observed by the Hindus. It is notorious that the Christians observe the social practices of the Hindus in the matter of births, deaths, and marriages. I say nothing about the prevalence of the Hindu social practice among the Christians. Inasmuch as these social practices have no religious significance, it matters very little what they are. But the same cannot be said of religious observances. They are incompatible with Christian belief and Christian way of life. The question is, why has Christianity not been able to stamp them out? The answer is that the Christian missionaries, although they have been eager to convert persons to Christianity, have never put up a determined fight to uproot paganism from the convert. Indeed, they have tolerated it. The retention by the converts to Christianity of paganism is primarily the legacy of the Jesuit missions, which were the earliest to enter the field in modern times. The attitude of the Catholic mission towards paganism has come down from the outlook and the ways and means adopted by the Madhura mission. This mission was founded by an Italian Jesuit, Father Robert de Nobili. He came to India in 1608. Having learned of the failure of Francis Xavier, he worked out a new plan. He decided to follow the footsteps of the Apostle Paul, who observed that he must bring all things to all men, that he might have some. Fortified with his belief, he went to the court of Perimal Naik, king of Madura, and founded the famous Madura mission. The way he started it graphically is told by Dr. J. N. Ogilvy in his Apostles of India in the following passage. Through Madura there ran one day a striking piece of news. It was told how a strange ascetic from some far land had arrived, drawn to the holy city by its great repute, and that he had taken up his abode in the Brahmin quarter of the city. Soon visitors flocked to the house of the holy man to see what they should see, but only to find that the Brahmin servants would not permit their entrance. The master, they said, is meditating upon God. He may not be disturbed. This merely helped to whet the people's desire and increase the fame of the recluse. The privacy was relaxed and daily audiences were granted to a privileged few. Seated cross-legged on a settee, the sannyasi was found by his visitors conforming in everything to Brahmin usage. Over his shoulder hung the sacred cord of 5 threads, 3 of gold to symbolize the Trinity, and 2 of silver representing the body and soul of our Lord, and from the cord was suspended a small cross. Conversation revealed that the sannyasi's learning and observation and keen inquiry certified to this frugal and holy life. One meal a day, consisting of a little rice and milk and acid vegetables, was all his food. Soon, not only ordinary Brahmins came to see him, but nobles also. And a great bound in his reputation took place when, on being invited to the palace by the king, the sannyasi declined the invitation lest, on going forth, the purity of his soul should be sullied by his eyes lighting upon a woman. Never was a holier saint seen in Mandra. Where the life bore such testimony to his holiness, how could his teaching be other than true? His statement that he was a Roman Brahmin of the highest caste was accepted, and to remove any possible doubts that might linger, an ancient discolored parchment was produced which showed how the Brahmins of Rome had sprung directly from the god Brahma and were the noblest born of all issues. To the genuineness of the document, the sannyasi solemnly swore, and with open minds the people listened to his teaching. Book after book was written by the able and daring writer, in which he crafted a modified Christian doctrine on the Hindu stem. Most notable of all such efforts was the forging of a 5th Veda to complete and crown the 4 Vedas received by Brahmins as direct revelations from heaven. It was an amazing piece of daring as bold and hazardous as would be for a Hindu to forge for Christian use a 5th gospel. Yet the forgery held its place for 150 years. Brahman disciples were soon freely won. Baptisms became fairly numerous, though the identity of the rite with the baptism administered by the early European missionaries was disguised, and so far as outward tokens went, the new missionary method was proving a success. Without a doubt, progress was greatly facilitated by the highly significant concessions that were made to Hinduism, especially in connection with caste. According to the Nobili, caste had little signification. To him, it was in the main a social observance, and so regarding it, he saw no reason for compelling his converts to break with their caste fellowship or observances. His converts retained the shendhi or tuft of hair which marked the caste Hindu. They wore a sacred cord indistinguishable from that of the Hindu neighbors, and they bore an oval caste mark on their brow, the paste composing or being made of the ashes of sandalwood instead of as formerly of the ashes of cow dung. For 40 years, Dinavili lived his life, a life of daily hardship, sacrifice, and voluntary humiliation, such as has seldom been paralleled. On February 16, 1656, he died, having reached his 80th year. Nearly 100,000 converts have been attributed to him, directly or indirectly, and allowing for much exaggeration, their number must have been great. In 1673, John de Brito, belonging to one of the noblest families of Portugal, sailed for India. He is now a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. William Robinson of the London Missionary Society and belonging to our own day said of him, His eminence as a disciple, intrepid, selfless, and enduring in all great qualities that add to the vigor of the Christian life, is assured. He and the Christian converts, after the disruption of the kingdom of Madura and the establishment of petty kingdoms, were mercilessly prosecuted. Yet, in spite of all that enemies could do, the worker went steadily on with his accepted duty, and wherever he journeyed, the same tale of success was told. To the power of the message was added the charm of the messenger, and his converts were numbered by thousands. When, by his hands, a prince of Marawa, Tevar, was baptized, measures were quickly taken to secure De Brito's death. He was mercilessly done to death on February 4th, 1693. Father Joseph Beschi, an Italian priest and successor to De Brito, reached India in 1707. Beschi adhered to the policy of the Roman Brahmins, but in his missionary practice differed considerably from his predecessors. De Nobili, so long as it has been possible, acted the part of a devout recluse, a holy guru. De Brito had been chiefly the wandering sannyasi. The holy pilgrim, and in their personal life, both had practiced the greatest asceticism and simplicity. But Father Beshi followed a new line. If Hinduism had its ascetics, it also had its high priests who lived in luxurious comfort and whose outward surroundings were marked by pomp and circumstance. This was the line chosen by Beshi, who, by significance, he would dazzle the people. When he travelled, it was a costly palanquin. In advance went an attendant bearing an umbrella of purple silk. At each side ran servants with gorgeous fans of peacock feathers, and in the palanquin, upon a splendid tiger skin and clad in rich and picturesque robes, reclined the mighty Guru. But Beshi was no empty-headed poser. His method was adopted with a full understanding of the people, and with many it worked well. Nor does his fame rest on these extravagances, it is based upon his wonderful scholarship. A born linguist, he attained so complete a mastery over Tamil that he became the ablest Tamil scholar of his time. No native scholar was his equal. High Tamil as well as low, the Tamil of the scholarly Brahmin as well as the colloquial language of the people were equally familiar to Beshi. Dictionaries, grammars, works of poetry, and treatises in prose issued from his busy pen, and they are read and valued to the present day. When first issued, they delighted the native world of southern India. So charmed with his learning was Chanda Sahib, the Nabob of Vellore, that he appointed him to high office in the state, and for his support presented him with 4 villages in the Trichonopoli district, which brought in a revenue of 12,000 rupees. All this fame and material prosperity Beshi loyally used for the furtherance of the mission. Its palmiest days were in his time, and its rapid decline leading to its ultimate collapse dates from about the period of Father Beshi's death, which occurred in 1742. These Madhura missionaries, in their anxiety to present Christianity to the convert, free from any Western customs that might give offense, had tolerated among their converts several Hindu customs as concessions to the converts. Among these concessions were the retention of the sacred thread and the mark on the forehead, the marrying of children before they attained puberty, the refusal of the sacraments to females at certain times, bathing as a ceremonial purification, and other points, and the refusal to marry and dine outside caste. These were called the Malabar Rites. They were abrogated on 12th September 1744 by the bull Omnium Solicitudinum issued by Pope Benedict the 14th, and since then every Roman Catholic missionary is required to take an oath to obey this bill. All the same, the tradition remained that pagan ways and pagan beliefs were not incompatible with Christian faith. It is no doubt true that a great obstacle in the way of the missionaries in the 16th century was not only the evil example shown by bad Europeans, but also the dislike with which European customs were viewed by Hindus and Muslims alike. A wicked European, of course, caused scandal, but a devout European who ate beef and drank spirits offended against Brahminical and Mohammedan tenets and shocked native prejudices. Thus, Christianity was despised as the religion of the Ferengis, as Europeans were contemptuously termed. To have cleansed the Christian missionaries of these impurities and infirmities was very necessary, and not only justifiable but commendable. But it was quite shameful and sinful for these Jesuit missionaries in their zeal for conversion to have gone to the length they did, namely, not to mind what the convert did or thought, and how he lived so long as he was ready to be baptized, acknowledge Jesus as his Savior, and call himself a Christian. What was the attitude of the Lutheran mission which came into the field soon after the Madura mission to this great question? Swartz, the greatest missionary in India, who by his piety became the peacemaker between warring kings, was not a protagonist of the view adopted by the Madura mission. But did he believe that caste and Christianity were two incompatible things and that a true Christian could not believe in caste, much less could he make it a plan of his life? Whatever was his view of the question, he certainly did not carry on a campaign in support of it. What about the Protestant missions? What attitude did they take towards this question? They have, first of all, an excuse on their side to plead if they wish to, that they came late on the scene. So far as history goes, there is truth behind the assertion that they were prevented from joining the field until 1813. This is due entirely to the attitude taken by the East India Company towards mission work in their territories in India. The attitude of all the European powers who went to India were in the beginning of their career greatly fired with an enthusiasm for the conversion of the Indians to the Christian faith. Speaking of the Portuguese, they were of course the most resolute in their propagation for Christianity and suppression of paganism. Albuquerque suppressed sati within Portuguese India in 1510 and anticipated William Bentinck by fully 300 years. As soon as Francis Xavier called out in despair the aid of John III of Portugal for forcible conversion, it was given. In the Dutch East Indies, the Dutch government was not a Protestant power. Similarly, and similar enthusiasm was displayed, and strong, if not drastic, measures were adopted. The principle of state aid for Christian propaganda was accepted in Ceylon right from 1643 when the Dutch occupied that island. The erection of temples and pagan pilgrimages were forbidden. Government appointments were reserved for Christians and non-attendance at religious schools treated as state offense. By 1684, 3,020,000 Sinhalese had yielded to these methods. The same religious fervor was shown by the East India Company. In 1614, a young Indian had been brought to London by the captain of the company's ship. The company educated him at its own expense to be an instrument in converting some of his nation. His baptism was performed at Poplar. The Lord Mayor of London and the directors of the company attended the baptism. King James I chose for him the name of Peter, and the priest who baptized him presented him to the audience as the first fruit of India. In 1617, there took place in Surat the conversion of a Mohammedan. Thus, the career of the company began with conversions at both ends. In 1657, the directors applied to the universities of Cambridge and Oxford for a chaplain, the company having resolved to endeavour the advance in spreading of the gospel in India. In 1698, the company very readily accepted a clause in a charter which required the company's chaplains to enable them to instruct should apply themselves to learn the language of the country, the better to enable them to instruct the Gentiles who should be the servants of the company or their agents in the Protestant religion. Suddenly, after 1698, the attitude of the company seems to have undergone a significant though gradual change. While the Portugal and the Dutch governments were going on with top speed, the East India Company had been slowing down. In the very year, the company seems to have been of two minds on this question. While it accepted an obligation to train its chaplains in vernaculars of India so as to make them potent instruments of propaganda, it allowed a prayer to be drawn up for the company which said that we, adorning the gospel of our Saviour in all things, these Indian natives among whom we dwell, beholding our good works, may be won over. This prayer continued to be offered, certainly, till 1750. A close scrutiny of the wording of the prayer suggests, if it does not avow, the complete abandonment of the original idea of active proselytizing. This attitude of the company soon became a matter of controversy. Friends of conversion were waiting for an opportunity to force the company to give up this attitude. The Regulating Act of 1773 and Pitt's East India Act had put an end to a state disguised as a merchant and brought the company the chartered agent of Parliament to carry on the government of the Indian territories. It was provided under the Act that the charter of the company should be only for 20 years and should be renewed thereafter. The year 1793 was of immense importance since the revision of the charter of the company was to fall due in that year. To those who favored the diffusion of Christian knowledge, the task seemed quite easy. Wilberforce, who was in charge of the matter, had secured the support of important persons in Parliament. He had obtained Archbishop Moore's blessing, and still more important, he had won a promise of support from the minister in charge of the East India Company's Charter Bill. As a preliminary to the passing of this bill, matters to be incorporated in the Charter were put in the form of resolutions to be passed by the House of Commons. One of the resolutions passed ran as follows: that it was the peculiar and bounden duty of the British legislature to promote, by all just and prudent means, the interest and happiness of the inhabitants of the British dominions in India, and that for these ends such measures ought to be adopted as may generally tend to their advancement in useful knowledge and to their religious and more improvement. Be it, therefore, further enacted that the said Court of Directors shall be and are hereby empowered and required to appoint and send out from time to time a sufficient number of fit and proper persons for carrying into effect the purposes aforesaid, by acting as schoolmasters, missionaries, or otherwise every such person, before he is so appointed or sent out, having produced to the said Court of Directors a satisfactory testimonial or certificate from the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Bishop of London for the time being, or from the Society in London for the promotion of Christian knowledge, or from the Society in Scotland for propagating Christian knowledge, of his sufficiency for these purposes. And be it further enacted that the said Court of Directors are hereby empowered and required to give directions to the governments of the respective presidencies in India to settle the destination and to provide for the necessary and decent maintenance of the persons to be sent out as aforesaid, and also to direct the said governments to consider of and adopt such other measures according to their discretion as may appear to them most conducive to the ends aforesaid. It was largely due to the support of Dundas that the House accepted the resolution without demur. Wilberforce was deeply moved. The hand of Providence, he wrote in his journal, was never more visible than in the East Indian affair. This confidence was premature, because on the third reading of the bill, the clause was struck out with the consent of the Dundas. Wilberforce wrote his friend Gisborne, "My clause is thrown out. Dundas most false and double." This change of front was brought about by the directors of the East India Company. The East India trade was a monopoly of the company, and no Englishman could enter the territories of the East India Company in India without license from the directors of the company, and any Englishman found in the territories of the company without a license was liable to be deported. The company did not take long to realize what the effect of the new clause would be. It knew that the clause would require them to open the gates of India to the flood of the missionaries and their propaganda. Should the missionaries be allowed a free hand, was the question of the hour. As was natural, this became a subject of a most interesting, instructive, and bitter controversy, and those who care to know it in its details may usefully refer to the pages of the Edinburgh Review and the of the day. There were three parties to this controversy. There were the directors of the East India Company, whose primary interest was to protect its shareholders who were clamoring for dividends. The second party to the controversy was the English middle class, which was living on the East India trade and whose sons were finding new avenues for lucrative careers in the territories. Thirdly, there was the Christian Missionary Society formed in the year for the purposes of spreading the Christian faith. The interests of the first two coincided. They worked for the maintenance of the empire and therefore wanted peace and tranquility. The third did care for peace but was keen on the substitution of Indian superstition by the Christian faith. The first made a powerful combination and obliged all the forces against the third. The result was that they triumphed and the church missionary society lost. The arguments advised by the most controversialist on the triumphant side are, of course, the most important and the most instructive part of the controversy. To the argument that the propaganda in favor of the Christian faith should begin at once, that it was wrong to hold that the truth, though sacred, should be doled out in such a way and in such bits as to avoid all risk, the reply given by Sidney Smith was a stunning reply. This is what he said. When we consider for how many centuries after Christ, Providence allowed the greater part of mankind to live in the eye without any possibility of their attaining to the knowledge and the sacred truths by any human exertion, we must be satisfied that the rapid and speedy conversion of the whole world forms no part of the scheme of its almighty governor, and that it can give no offense in his eyes if we do not desert our domestic duties and expose the lives and worldly happiness of multitudes of our fellow countrymen to hazard in an attempt to their conversion. The end.